Welcome to Cove Audiobooks The Doctrine Series. You're listening to LWD 1, The Fundamentals of Land Power, 2017 edition. This is Chapter 2, The Australian Army. It is important for an institution like the Army to possess a clear sense of self and purpose. This provides a strong foundation to develop and adapt ideas that align with the theoretical, historical, contemporary and societal influences that form the Army's philosophy. The Australian Army is the foundation of the nation's land power. As part of the Joint Force, it promotes and protects Australia's interests, deters threats to Australia's sovereignty, and if necessary, defeats them. These requirements inform Army's concept of land power. They also reinforce Army's culture, which has been shaped by the lessons of history and the contemporary environment. Understanding the concept of land power and culture within the Australian Army places in context the key tasks that government has entrusted to Army strategic tasks. Only credible Australian land power will be capable of executing these enduring tasks and support the Australian Defence Force's purpose, securing Australia and its national interests. The Australian Army's concept of land power. Australia's approach to land power resides within a larger approach to using military and national power. Only land power can provide persistent influence on land to shape intentions, deny threat access to resources, protect populations, and build the capacity of Indigenous security forces. Although land power is more than the Army, within the Australian Defence Force, it is the Army that provides rapid and scalable land force options to government across the spectrum of operations. Australia's strategic culture over the last century has been to use expeditionary land power elements to achieve national political objectives. In Australia's case, because the Army has been drawn from a relatively small population base, land power has always been related not so much to size and mass, but to quality and the employment of limited military forces to achieve disproportionate strategic effects for political ends. This highlights how Australia uses land power to reinforce its use of the instruments of national power: diplomatic, information, military, and economic. It also demonstrates the utility of land power and its human dimensions. The utility of land power. The employment of land forces in peace, crisis, and war illustrates the inherent utility of land power. It offers government scalable and responsive options across the conflict spectrum. Tensions in times of peace, such as economic rivalries, diplomatic friction, and ideological differences, deterring aggression, peacekeeping, and up to fighting in joint and coalition operations. Army's responsibilities include promoting and shaping the international security environment and responding to crises that are not strictly defined as war, such as humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. These actions provide weight to Australia's strategic and diplomatic efforts. Furthermore, many nations in the world remain predominantly land powers. Their perception of another nation's land power can shape and influence their intentions and actions. This forms strategic deterrence, reducing the likelihood of future threats. If a threat or crisis does arise, land power provides flexibility for responses. Land power offers operational and strategic flexibility by providing the government with the means to respond to changing circumstances. Land power is supported by and supports the other elements of national power. Furthermore, credible land power can operate across the entire land domain, including the electromagnetic spectrum, while also being able to influence the air, sea, space, and cyber domains. Within this context, land power, through the actions of the Australian Army, provides persistent control and sustained influence on or from the land in conditions of peace, crisis, and conflict. While land power consists of more than the Army, it is the Army alone that represents the portion of Australia's national effort capable of undertaking close combat on the land, as well as a wide range of non-combat tasks on Australian territory and abroad. Because of this, Australia's land power provides strategic response. To achieve these strategic effects, land power requires a strong human dimension. Human dimension of Australian land power. Although land power is made up of the national elements of economy, people, national will, and force elements, the human dimension of many of these components form the foundation of land power. Armies depend on the abilities of professional, innovative, adaptable individuals who can react quickly to changing conditions. Such soldiers must be high-quality people, moulded by training, education, and discipline into cohesive teams with high morale, or esprit de corps, and the will to win. The human dimension adds to land power's utility, especially in missions that require close human interaction. The Australian Army relies on the large reservoir of human talent. As a result of the increasing average age of Australia's population, tapping this reservoir of human talent, particularly the young, physically fit individuals who form the core of the land force, will become an increasingly difficult task. Australia's culture guides the organisation and the individual in achieving the tasks. Australian Army culture. The Australian Army was formed on the 1st of March 1901, when the Commonwealth of Australia assumed control of the former colonial military forces. Since its formation, the Army's culture has evolved as the nature of Australia's engagement with the wider world has developed. Originally dominated by a militia of volunteer forces, permanent forces in 1901 comprised only 1,500 of the 28,500 members of the Army. Its volunteer nature has in part been a central characteristic of the Australian Army. But this only provides a partial understanding about the culture of the Army and its use of the force in the 20th and earliest 21st centuries. Strategic culture is the context that surrounds and gives meaning to strategic behaviour, and this behaviour is affected by culturally shaped people, organisations, procedures, and weapons. Understanding strategic culture may provide an improved capacity for understanding enduring motivations for institutions, as well as understanding the meaning of why that institution might act as it does. Therefore, in proposing the doctrine of how and why the Army fights, it is important to understand the culture and motivations of the Army. The culture of the Army pervades its members and organisations. The soldiers of the Australian Army carry this culture with them to the battlefield. By understanding the elements of culture of the Army and how they interact, we can understand how it influences our warfighting philosophy and how it may enable comparative advantage for Australian land forces deployed on operations. An expeditionary culture. On its founding in 1901, the Australian Army had forces deployed in South Africa in support of the British during the Boer War. This external focus of the Army has been an enduring theme in how it operates, and with the exception of a brief period in the 1980s and 1990s, the Army's doctrine and organisation has largely been orientated on its deployment beyond Australian shores to fight in support of Australian interests, rather than Australian territory. Whether it has been contributions to major wars such as the First and Second World Wars, more regional conflicts such as Korea, Vietnam and Afghanistan, or stabilisation and peacekeeping in the Asia, Pacific and Africa, these commitments have seen the development of a strong expeditionary culture. This has often gone hand in hand with the second element of Army culture, its predisposition to working within alliance and coalition frameworks. A coalition culture. Coalitions and alliances are voluntary groupings of nations that are based upon commonality of objectives and a respect for each member's independence and self-interests. The Army's first expedition, the Boer War, took place within an imperial framework in support of the British forces. This has been an enduring theme in the employment of the Australian Army. While this has been driven to a large degree by the small size of the Australian Army, it is also a function of the shared values of Australia and many other nations which it has partnered with in war. The interactions between the Australian Army and its coalition partners have also influenced the development of the Army. A training culture. The importance of training, both individual and collective, is central to how the Army raises and sustains capability. Even during periods of low budgets and underinvestment in modern equipment, particularly in the post-Vietnam War era, the Army has sustained a focus on ensuring it maintains high standards in training, especially, but not exclusively, for individual training. This training culture has focused on achieving excellence in three areas: individual, small teams, leadership at all levels of command, and combined arms operations. Historically, the Army has demonstrated that high standards of individual and collective training enable tactical organisations to prevail in the face of numerically superior or better equipped enemies, and until recently, the approach to training emphasised being able to achieve this. In the past decade, there has been a subtle shift whereby the Army no longer trains as the smaller army in the fight, but is focused on overcoming numerically smaller and less technically sophisticated enemies, such as those in Iraq and Afghanistan. With the changes in the strategic environment described in the next chapter, this is unlikely to provide the best foundation for the future. As such, the training culture will need to readjust to ensure our army is prepared to fight outnumbered and win in the future. A culture of austerity. The Australian Army has been, since its inception, an army that has been accustomed to austerity in resources, and this has in turn shaped its culture, how it organises and how it operates. It may be necessary for the Army to fight at the end of a long, expensive and vulnerable line of communication, backed by a support area with limited defence industrial capacity. The practical difficulties of providing logistic support for military operations in Australia and beyond has been a limiting factor on the structure and size of force committed to operations, but also the combat weight of deployed forces. For most of its history, the Australian Army has deployed light formations with only limited heavy or medium armour in support. This has shaped two other elements of Army culture: our tactical, small unit culture and our practical, pragmatic approach. Tactical, small unit culture. The Australian Army has largely been characterised by tactical and small unit approaches for its entire history. While there have been limited instances of operational responsibility, for example the 1st Australian Army in the Pacific Campaign, this was focused on the orchestration of tactical efforts. Small size of the regular army since its creation in 1947 reinforced the tactical tradition with a self-image based on a motto that the land force role is to win battles on the land. While battle is indeed the greatest of all military tests, battle by itself is not the totality of what a modern army might be called upon to perform. Symptomatic of a small army, it has also been driven by the Army's coalition culture. As a junior partner, the influence on military strategy has been limited, and therefore the Army has largely ensured this role. Notwithstanding this tactical culture, the Army's tactical approach has almost exclusively been offensive in nature. The focus on patrolling, ambushing and infantry minor tactics on the Western Front, the North African Desert, the South Pacific, Vietnam and in contemporary conflict has been a central theme in the tactical conduct of the Australian Army's operations. The 1985 edition of Army's Capstone Doctrine noted, "The essence of soldiering is excellence at the execution of the tactical level of warfare." This has dominated the Army's approach to war. Practical and pragmatic approach. Army has traditionally embraced a practical and pragmatic culture that has reinforced its preference to embrace technological advances that enhance its tactical, small unit capabilities. Although in the past this has been achievable through both a technological edge and a practical approach to problems, the future environment will require intellectual investment to create a cognitive edge to achieve pragmatic outcomes that serve Australia's interests. Impact of culture. These 7 elements of Army culture do not exist in isolation. They developed over the past century and interact to influence the Army's view of itself, warfighting, and how to influence and win a war. Nor are these elements of Army culture unique to the Australian Army. All Western armies possess them to some degree, but accord each different weight depending on the historical experiences of individual nations. Further, Army culture must not be viewed as monolithic. It is a subset of still developing larger defence culture. Despite this, there are discernible elements of Army culture. Knowing who or what the Australian Army is essential to developing ways of improving effectiveness within the Army. The interaction of these, Army's historical experiences as well as geography, the expectations of national culture and government national security policy, have also shaped the Army's contemporary view of the employment of land power. Army strategic tasks. Army strategic tasks nest within the Defence Principal Tasks and form Army's contribution to national defence. The strategic effects of strategic deterrence and strategic response influence these tasks. These tasks may be conducted in isolation, concurrently or sequentially. The 3 strategic tasks are the shaping of Australia's strategic environment, denying and defeating threats to Australia's interests, and protecting and supporting Australian and foreign civil populations. Shaping Australia's strategic environment. Army contributes to the security of allies and other partners by providing training and material assistance. By participating in exercises, exchange programs and cooperative research, Army helps to develop and strengthen alliances and prospective coalitions. This also promotes democratic institutions and general stability in the countries with which Army engages. Specific activities include providing training and advice, participating in exercise and exchange programs, and developing interoperability with other forces to promote cordial relationships and confidence-building measures between countries, helping to monitor and control the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in the Asia-Pacific region, and more widely as necessary, and contributing to regional surveillance operations. Denying and defeating threats to Australia and its interests. While strategic shaping and conflict prevention are important, the Army's mission is to fight when prevention fails and to win this fight. This is Army's core business, and Australian society expects the Army to achieve its mission, to prepare land forces for war in order to defend Australia and its national interests. The conduct of sustained close combat in combined arms teams is the Army's unique contribution to joint or coalition force with a whole-of-government approach to war. Protecting and supporting Australian and foreign civil populations. Land forces have a preeminent role in protecting and supporting civil populations. Army, as part of the Australian Defence Force, supports government's objectives and the community at home and abroad. Army support can extend from the civil community support in disasters and emergencies to assistance to the civil authorities with border protection, counter-terrorism and terror attack response, and up to the evacuation of Australian and other nationals from hostile or crisis environments. Protecting and supporting populations may also include unilateral or multilateral missions with the United Nations or other coalition partners. These tasks reinforce how each conflict is different in its characteristics. Therefore, each deployment requires a unique, comprehensive and holistic plan to be executed for the specific circumstances of the operation. However, to prepare land forces for a wide range of contingencies which align with the government's requirements, a generic framework of interdependent and mutually supporting efforts has been developed. For the Australian Army, there are 5 efforts. These efforts should be viewed as a way of thinking about Army's contribution to land power and not as distinct lines of operation or lines of effort to be applied as a template during military planning. The 5 efforts are joint land combat, population protection, information dominance, population support, and Indigenous capacity building. Joint land combat are actions to secure the environment, remove organised resistance, and set conditions for other operations. Combined arms close combat is Army's fundamental contribution, and mastery of close combat is the foundation of warfighting. Population protection provides protection and security to threatened populations to set the conditions for the re-establishment of law and order. Information dominance informs and shapes the perceptions, attitudes, behaviour and understanding of target population groups, thereby shaping information and cognitive dimensions of the conflict. Population support establishes and restores or temporarily replaces the necessary essential services and affected communities. Indigenous capacity building nurtures the establishment of civilian governance, which may include local and central government, security, police, legal, financial and administrative systems. In deciding the combination of these efforts, the government will consider the national interest involved, the objectives sought, and the preferred way to effect an aggressor's and population's will. Land power is not the only and often may not be the lead instrument for dealing with national security problems. An interagency emphasis should permeate every level of warfare and command. Land power is a highly versatile element of the nation's power that provides multiple options to its government's statecraft. These options are built on the scalable nature of the Australian Army's possible contributions, the ability to vary the level of violence it applies to suit the objectives sought, and the Army's ability to work closely with the other elements of land, air and sea power. This versatility is enabled by the people who comprise the Australian Army. It's their ability to discriminate, innovate and adapt that provides the versatility inherent in land power and allows the Army to perform a wide range of tasks that contribute to national security. The Australian Army's preparation for war and combat starts with doctrine because this shapes subsequent decisions about equipment, training and organisational structure. It also infuses all soldiers with a particular mindset that aims to promote cohesion and combat success. The very top level of the Australian Army's thinking is referred to as its approach to warfare. The Army philosophy and the specific historical, intellectual and contemporary influences that have shaped it in Australia is the subject of the next chapter. Thank you for listening to Chapter 2 of 4 in our LWD1 audiobook series. Head to www.cove.org.au to listen to the next podcast in the collection.